This lesson today, we're continuing to look at Paul and not just his missionary journeys, not just all of those kinds of details, but, things that happened, his response, how did he handle things? And this particular lesson has to do with what do you do when you have a relationship problem that has caused problems for you, that has maybe caused you grief, that has created issue or enmity between you and another person. What is that like? If you had that experience, what healed that relationship, or what could heal that relationship? And so this is really going to be a discussion about restoring relationships. And I realized 45 minutes to try to figure all that out, not enough time. So what I'm going to do today is just present you some ideas and from Scripture, and hopefully you can take it and make application. All you got to do is just think for a minute about a problem you had in a relationship to make it real. Think about that. And think about what it was like. Maybe it's going on right now. I don't know. But maybe something from the past and what that felt like, how it was handled, and what the outcome was. Many years ago, I was in a job long before coming to LCU, and I happened to be in a church that supported what we did. It's a long story. But I knew, of course, a lot of worship with a lot of great people. Well, a situation arose where I had to make a decision about something related to my job that kind of spilled over into a relationship with a person at church. And without giving you all details, it didn't go well. This person was not happy with what I had done. And so, as I recall, I tried to put this out of my mind because it was very unpleasant. But as I recall, he called me on Friday evening, maybe, and I really didn't know this man other than by name and by one like he was waving across the auditorium kind of thing. I knew him by reputation, knew his family. And what happened on the other end of the phone just absolutely blew my mind. He launched into me like, well, I've never been talked to like that before. Choice words. What do you think was going through my mind when I started hearing all this stuff on the other end of the phone? What do you guess I was thinking? Well, first inclination was clicked. And I really wanted to hang up on him, but so the phone kind of went out. I mean, he was yelling. And he was not kind in what he was saying. And he was threatening. And all sorts of things that the only thing I knew about him really was that he was a very quiet and reserved fellow whenever I would see him in worship. But I felt like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde was on the other end of the phone. And he just really let me have it. And I tried to explain many times, at least 3 times, because really, technically, he didn't need to know. It wasn't his business. But he had inserted himself into the situation, made it his business, and then that was where we were. And it was so unpleasant. I remember we had a phone in our bedroom, and that's where I was having the conversation. And it lasted for, 15 or 20 minutes. And he never would calm down. I did everything I knew to try to get him to calm down. But he wasn't calming down because he wasn't getting the answer that he wanted from me. And he wasn't going to get that answer. I knew what he wanted. Anyway, long story short, we ended our conversation. I basically said, I can't talk to you any longer. This is not okay. And I did hang up. After I warned him, I wasn't going to. Well, Sunday was rolling around, like in 2 days, right? I was talking to my wife about the situation. Of course, she met me in the hallway. She said, what in the world is going on? But she could hear it. One of those kind of heated phone calls. So I told her what little bit I could. And so here we go, roll into church on Sunday morning. And one of the first people I see is who? I'm not kidding, guys. This is exactly how it happened. So I walk into the vestibule, and there he is. And of course, he looks at me and kind of gives me one of these. Goes on. From that point forward, we never said a word to each other, never had a conversation, nothing. And all these years later, I still wonder. how should that have been handled? We never reconciled. And I wonder, should we have reconciled? Should I have gone to him and said, look, but I did not. I stayed as far away from him as I could. And I'm not sure I handled that right. But I was young and dumb and didn't have a lot of experience. So if you're going to do that to me, then I'm not going to have anything to do with you.
Well, is he dead?
Well, I didn't try to kill him, so if that's what you're doing. No, I don't think he did, but I know where you're going.
You can still make it right.
I know where you're going. And then I had a boss who went the other way. You know, we all have had these situations where we've entered into these relationships and things have fallen apart. Things have not worked out. And when you read scripture and you look at it, I would expect that perhaps from someone who's not claiming to be a child of God. You know? But what really messes with me is we were both, I think he's still living, I honestly don't know, both children of God. And that's not how we should act. That's not how we should deal with things. That's not me saying that. So, yes, sir, go for it.
I don't know that I would have followed it at the time, okay?
Yeah.
But what I would have suggested as he starts his rant.
Yeah.
Brother, we can meet with the elders.
Yeah.
Because that will calm people down in a hurry.
Yeah.
Because they really don't want to.
No,
They
I
don't
think,
want to bring it up. But that's the biblical
I think you're right.
way of doing it. You can't bring a brother into the moment. You can't take someone with you because they don't know the situation.
Yeah,
But you can say, let's meet with the elders.
sure.
And this person probably wouldn't want to bring this up at that level of using that terminology
Yeah, I
with
mean,
the
that's,
elders there.
yeah,
And that, you wouldn't have ever, it wouldn't have followed, probably wouldn't have followed through. But you wouldn't have solved you would have done all you could do.
in retrospect, yes, that would have been a good idea. And there's too many, well, I don't have time to go on this, too many dynamics at play, and even involving the elders would have been tricky, but that's another story for another day. But you're right, seeking counsel and wisdom from elders and trying to move along and solving something between two brothers. And Jesus addresses it in Matthew 5, and let's look at that. Now, we've all seen this verse, I'm pretty sure, Matthew 5, 21 through 24. But guys, when I read it and I really let it sink in, it is so profound what Jesus is telling us here. All right, so let's just read it real quickly and then a couple of comments. You have heard that it was said of those of old, you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment. But I say to you, this is Jesus, that everyone who's angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council, and whoever says, you fool, will be liable to hellfire. So, if you're offering your gift at the altar, and there you remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift. Leave it before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift. Do you hear what he's saying there? All right, first of all, he reminds us that, there are rules about killing people. Right? Murder has consequences. So he kind of throws that out there in the beginning. We know that there are rules against that, but what I'm telling you is this. So the whole idea of him starting to talk about murder and how wrong that is and how consequences ensue, and then he comes right into, but I'm telling you guys, if you're just angry with your brother, there are consequences. If you insult your brother, there are consequences. Insult? Anybody been insulted by a brother? Let's not go down. Please stop and think. And then he says, if you talk in such a way that you regard a brother as a fool, trust me, guys, back in the scenario I told you, I was thinking to myself, this guy's an idiot. I mean, when I read this, I'm like, wow. And trust me, I spent a lot of time in prayer about that. It's
Or you
not,
can be an idiot you still love.
well, yeah, well, that's true. But saying it, calling somebody out, will be liable. Liability is a huge word. It's a big word. We'll be held responsible. And so what is that telling us? Well, Jesus talks to us an awful lot about love. And I think that is implied in this, is that beneath it all and surrounding it all, if you don't love your brother or your sister, then this is really difficult. And then he goes on, but even if you do love them, it's really difficult. But he says this, even if you come in here to worship and you remember, oh yeah, I got a problem with Roger back there. He and I haven't reconciled. And look what he says. Stop what you're doing and go and work it out with your brother. Then come back and worship me. Yes, sir.
I think one of the significant things about this text is it doesn't put the responsibility on the guilty party. It says, if you remember that your brother has aught against you,
Yeah.
That's right.
do what you can to reconcile.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
I mean, that is something that is very hard to do.
It is.
And I mean, and I can almost guarantee that our elders in here have had that issue where someone has had a problem with them. I mean, I've been there and it hurts, but you have that responsibility. It says, do what you can. I mean, you may not be able to resolve the issue,
That's right.
but do what you can. And just in your telling of your story, I think you probably handled the phone call very well.
I thought it did.
Yeah. Now, maybe there might have been more that you could have done afterward. I don't know.
Maybe.
And
Maybe.
especially after time, it kind of solved his anger.
Well, I just moved out of town after that.
Well,
Me too. That's what happened.
But we do what we do because we love Christ more
Yeah.
than we love ourselves.
And we love our fellow man. our fellow
Of course, their
people.
souls. Their souls are important, more important than what we care about.
Excellent points.
but I mean, our responsibility is to love them and do what we can to reconcile their issues
Yeah.
with us.
And you mentioned it hurts. It's painful.
Oh, yeah, it's very painful.
I wish there was some way we could have enough time to just sit here and practice role play, if you will. How do you do that? How do you actually go to someone? How do you actually try to reconcile? I mean, we read all this and it's beautiful and it makes sense and we know we should do it, but the trouble is in the doing sometimes. And I can speak to that because I've been there.
But if the love of Christ is in you, they will see it.
I
People
hope
get
so.
mad at me all the time, I'm sure, because I'm windy, but it's like,
W-I-N. That's good.
but I think they know that even though I'm little it, I love Christ, that he is and that's what I hold on to. And I would never hurt a soul in order to be great myself. And I think they can see that. And I'm not saying, I'm sorry, that sounded arrogant, but I didn't mean for it to.
I got you. Yeah. Well, we would hope that the way we live demonstrates Christ. So relationships being what they can be, challenging. The need to reconcile is clearly delineated here, and the need to restore and do what we need to do to make that restoration possible. But you can be rejected by the other party, obviously.
But it doesn't matter.
No,
You still do the right
It's
thing.
on them.
Yeah.
Well, Paul said that as much as it depends on us,
Yes.
be at peace with all men.
That's right.
So just write him a note. I'll write it for you if you like.
No, I probably will check on that and see. What was odd about that whole thing after it was over, I knew his family really well, his kids and his wife, who was the sweetest thing. You know, and I just feel like that it was just a lot of misunderstanding, and I kind of rehashed that whole thing. I'm like, you know, probably a brief phone call or a no would probably take care of it. Even today, all these years.
I mean, I'm just telling you still love him and you're sorry that
I
happened.
don't know if I love it. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, you better, boy.
Just kidding. All right, so you get the idea here of where Jesus comes down on, or where his view and his teaching about relationships. And, you know, it seems to me that restoring relationships is so important to God that he's using Jesus to teach his disciples to be right with each other as much as they possibly can. Because if you're not right with each other, it's really hard to approach worship correctly. I think that's part of the message here of what he's saying. And then he mentions 1 John, you know, how can we say we love God and not love our brother, who, by the way, was made in his image? And, you know, the older I get, the more simple I try to be. But it's, I guess I've been simple all my life. But, you know, I try to look at things in a little more simplistic way. And, you know, I'm going to diverge for just a second. But I want you to think about something. How often have we heard this spoken or read this? His image. Now, I'm not going to chase any rabbits here. I just want you to think about it. In light of what we're talking about, restoration, if we can start by reminding ourselves, you're made in his image. You're made in his image. I'm made in his image. My friend that I was having issue with, made in his image. Our neighbors are made in his image. Am I right? Am I missing something there? His
No,
image.
sir, you're right.
His image. How can I, this is personal, how can I not do what's necessary in restoring my relationships if this is true? Right? And I'm not trying to guilt us at all. Please don't mishear me. This is so profound. And I also contend that all the, how can I say, all the stuff that's going on in our world about how we're treating people of color or people of different cultures or however you want to describe it, we don't stop and realize this is where it all begins. Then we're never going to get anything solved in our relationships just with people. But surely as brothers and sisters in Christ, we get this, right? I mean, we get it, at least in our heads, cognitively, we understand it. But whenever I read that now, I used to read it and go, oh, that's cool, made in his image. But now I try and stop and go, anytime I see that, I go, what? Me? Made in his image? You? Absolutely. It's a building full of us. And how powerful is that when we want to influence and impact the world? And this is not something that puts us in a position to have a huge ego or boast about it. This is a fact. We're in his image.
I think even beyond that, we realize that those people out there in the world, they were created in his image.
Absolutely.
They may not live it.
Yep.
Just that sometimes we don't live it, but
I know.
you know, they were created in his image. They have that capacity.
That's right. That's exactly right. So,
I'm sorry.
go ahead.
When we circle around to reconciliation, his image allowed himself to be put to death in order to reconcile
For us.
we were the guilty parties, you and Nathan, and how we should have been willing to die to self for the sake of another brother or sister or lost soul, whatever. That really kind of kills all your excuses.
Good point. So this whole discussion could be, you know, the remainder of our class time, which is getting away from us, but I don't want us to forget about the fact that we're looking at Paul. And really, in this context, we're looking at his second missionary journey. And just a few little facts there, that took about 3 years, basically about 12 different locations in that time frame, about 2,800 miles. So that was a big one. That was a huge missionary move. And it was Paul and Silas and Timothy, Luke. There were many involved in that, and they went all over the place. And there's a long list of places that they went. But the point I want you to get is that when we get into text for the day, Acts 15, if you want to look at that. Acts 15, 36 through 41, I'm going to read that very quickly. But we see these well-intentioned brothers and sisters. We see these people on a mission, right? Because we remember Paul's on fire, right? He is absolutely on fire to spread the word, the gospel, to everyone. And remember how important and how earth-shattering that was at that time, that not just the Jews get it, but the Gentiles, the Greeks, everybody. So that's why this, to me, that's why this whole idea of taking it to the whole world was so very important. And Paul got it, and he was on his way along with others. And that's where we're at. Even with all of these great things going on, these well-intentioned people, these fellow Christians, problems occurred. It wasn't free of that. So look at Acts 15. And after some days, Paul said to Barnabas, "Let us return and visit the brothers in every city, where we proclaim the word of the Lord, and see how they are." You know, Paul, that's something he did. He liked to go check on folks and see how they were doing as a means of encouraging, I think. Now, Barnabas wanted to take with him John, called Mark. But Paul thought it best not to take with them the one who had withdrawn from them in Pamphylia and had not gone with them to the work. And there arose a sharp disagreement, so that they separated from each other. Barnabas took Mark with him, sailed away to Cyprus. Paul chose Silas, departed, having been commended by the brothers to the grace of the Lord. And he went through Syria and Cilicia, doing what he did, strengthening the churches. All right, who was wrong in this disagreement? Who was at fault in this disagreement?
Paul. He's going to take Barnabas over taking Mark.
And
Not necessarily either.
Yeah.
the loaded question.
It would be depending on which, how you view the situation from each side.
Right.
Paul doesn't want to, Paul doesn't want to take a guy that's going to quit.
Yeah.
And because that's going to world clean up.
Right.
But by the same token, Barnabas says, how do you know he's going to quit again?
Right.
And he doesn't know that. So they have a legitimate disagreement, which there is no biblical answer for. It's not that you can read a scripture and go, this is how to solve
This
it.
is the answer.
It's a disagreement.
I agree. And if you read, various commentaries on it, you're going to see all sorts of different ways of looking at it. Some will talk about it being a sinful act and describing that. Some will look at it as, well, it really wasn't that big a deal. Everything went on anyway, But here's some things we do know about this disagreement. And I think Roger really laid it out nicely, but here's some things to know. Both of these men loved God. See that being true? They both loved God. And I think they loved each other as brothers. They really do. I don't know how you can do a mission like this, and I have known lots of missionaries over the years. And I've known missionary teams that go into places like you have probably. And sometimes those things fall apart, but a lot of times when they work like they should, there's a love for each person in that relationship as they're out spreading the gospel. And I think we could probably safely say that they're living out their gifts in a sense. And Paul is driven. We know that already. He's on his way. We got to keep doing this. And what was Barnabas's gift?
Encouraging.
And that's his name, the encourager. So apparently they're both doing what they're gifted to do. And I still think we can say that they were spirit-led. None of that really changed, I don't think.
Then later on, Paul asked for John Mark because he was valuable to him. He said.
Yeah, we do know the rest of the story, that's right. But if we pretend as if we don't know it and just look at it, this one event, it kind of looks like, everything's going to go off the rails. But that's another thing that we notice is that neither of them left the mission, right? Neither of them you know, took their ball and stopped playing and went home, like a little kid would do.
And actually, as a result of this, the mission was actually doubled.
And when we think about consequences, yeah, when you look at all that, now you had basically a two-pronged mission that was moving forward, spirit-led, out of purpose, out of mission, wanting to save lost souls. And you could maybe make the case that, as we know about how Satan likes to work in things, maybe the enemy Satan was doing what he could to break this thing up. Come on, wouldn't he? Yeah, wouldn't he try things? And one of Satan's best tools, in my opinion, is putting people at odds with each other, especially Christians at odds with each
One
other.
of the things that just occurred to me is, you know, Paul was really kind of Barnabas's first student to take along on the mission deal, because Barnabas was really the leader in that group at first. Paul was ready to go out on his own now, and Barnabas needed to take John Mark and bring him along a little further. So it's something that was a result of this conflict that moved Barnabas a little further along in helping someone else.
Yeah, so that's a good point. So the enemy, if you want to look at it that way, sought to destroy this mission, but as it turns out, God was able to multiply the mission through this. That's a good way to look at it. And it's not to say that a sharp disagreement is a good thing always, or a pleasant thing, but they apparently were able to press beyond that, move forward, and continue on. And then, of course, we know later the rest of the story, how they continue to work together. But I think, and this is just food for you to think about, food for thought. Do we always need someone to blame when we have disagreements?
Ourselves mostly.
Don't you go down that road. Yeah, go back to my example. I wanted to, and I did, blame that gentleman for a long time. I did. Held him responsible. After all, he called me, right? You get where I'm going. So I think that's how I was able to square it for a long time. He was at fault. So he needs to fix himself. I'm fine. I did it backwards, right? I did it backwards. Next time I'm going to use the call the elders ploy. But all kidding aside, what happens when we want blame to be assigned is that becomes a thing that we cling to, is the blame, I think. And that's kind of human nature. We cling to the blame. And then what often rears its ugly head when we're dealing with the blame game and all of that? What's the other thing that usually comes out of that?
Anger, wrath.
Thank you. Anger and wrath. Now there's a word we don't use very often, but that's a strong word.
And arrogance.
Well, hubris, arrogance, yeah, some of you knows that, looking down, whatever, yeah, you know, whatever word you want to use, but a lot of times anger becomes the other emotion that becomes so strong here. And I'm going to confess to you, I was angry with this man. I was very angry. And see if you've ever thought of this before. How dare he say that to me? All right? He has no idea what I'm doing and what my responsibility is. So how dare he say that and accuse me of this? How dare he? So where was I at that moment? I was right smack in the middle of blame and anger. Now I knew he was already angry. I mean, I could feel the heat through the phone. Right? I already knew that. So that, you know, was, so sometimes, guys, and you know this, anger begets anger. And then we've got ourselves worked into a frenzy sometimes. And so, not that we should skip over this concept at all, but we got to be careful about missing God's redemptive power through reconciliation. If we're too wrapped up in blame and anger. And anger is such a profound emotion for many people. And it's a hard one to deal with for a lot of us. And you know that. It's hard to get that squared up sometimes because it's such a strong emotion. But here's what Paul said when he was talking to the church at Ephesus, and you guys know this verse, Ephesians 4, 26, 27. Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down in your anger. Give no opportunity to the devil. I need to put that right here somewhere. Maybe we should bring back phylacteries. Those where you kept your prayer stuff. I could remember if I had a box here strapped to my head where I could remember stuff. But man, we've all seen this verse. So what's Paul saying here? As an example of some of the results of blame, troubled relationships, anger. What's he telling us here? How do you see it? Anyone? Anyone out there? What's he telling us? Well, you know the usual question is it a sin to be angry?
No,
No,
Now, let's just go ahead and get over that one. Yeah, no, that's not what he's saying here. He's saying in your anger, don't sin.
don't let anger control you.
Exactly. In your anger, don't sin. And not only that, guys. Oh boy, this one scared me a little bit. Don't let the sun go down on your anger. No, I have let the sun go down on my anger before. See, I think another thing we need to do, and I don't know why I'm doing this today, but we need to be a little more transparent with each other sometimes on things like this. And just let people know it's a struggle. It's hard. I know there are people in this room, probably in this church, that are struggling with this right now. And we just kind of tiptoe around it, and we don't.
well, two went forward just last week.
Really.
That very thing. Read the bulletin.
Oh, I do, but a lot of names I don't know. No, and not being here last week, I missed out on that.
I asked for prayers for that specific thing, anger.
Good. So I think Paul is reminding us, look, out of this love that we have for each other, if you get angry, because clearly he did, I think. I mean, when you look at the language, at least the interpretation of the language, sharp disagreement, to me that spells an angry situation.
Well, don't you think when Jesus went in and turned all those tables over,
Yeah,
you think he was happy about that?
he wasn't redecorating, he was moving things around. He was taking care of, and he was angry. Sure.
Surely he was. It was sin. I mean,
So not letting our sun go down in our anger. Why? Well, I think it's pretty clear. If we,
You lose sleep that way.
well, you sure do. Yeah, absolutely. And if we stay stuck in that, then it creates the perfect opportunity for Satan to do his work. And, sometimes I wish we could actually just see Satan sometimes. Be with me for a second. And just see what he looks like and how excited he gets when he's trying to ruin the rest of us. I mean, wouldn't that be interesting? A little frightening, of course, but
Scare us to death.
probably would
well, I
all.
think we see him all the time.
Well, we do. What I'm saying, I want Satan to show me. I want to see just how he goes about. I don't really, but you get my point. It's like when we're angry, it puts a crack, it opens the door for Satan, who's standing right here. I mean, he's right here, guys. He's just waiting. And so the door opens, boom. I think that's what Paul's trying to tell us here today, guys. Yeah, we're going to get angry. We're going to have disagreements. Don't let it move over into anger. Don't let it culminate. And that's where being human, it's difficult. We don't remember his image and all these things. So conflict, I think we've already figured out it's inevitable. It's going to happen. We have it in our lives. Disagreements are going to happen. And there's all sorts of tools out there if you struggle with this. There's a book, and I don't think I'm saying this guy's last name properly, Sande, Sandy, I suppose. He wrote a book called The Peacemaker. And just in the little bit of time we have left, I just want to mention some of his ideas. Very simple, it's kind of easy to understand. So I think we have to think about, okay, when I'm engaged in conflict, when I need to reconcile, how can I do that in such a way that honors God, right? And honors both parties, if you will, in the disagreement. Yeah, honor is a great word right there too. You know, back to my example, if I had thought about how can I behave in this instance and honor this other person, that would have completely turned around my view. Does that make sense? If I would have instead of thought of him as the devil, which is kind of what I thought of at that moment, and if I had at least had enough sense to go, wait a minute, is what I'm doing honoring God? No. Is what I'm doing honoring him? No. Is what I'm doing honoring myself? Not really. I don't know that the outcome would have been any different, but I think my thinking would have surely changed. Right?
One of the scriptures that comes to mind is Solomon who said, in a soft anger, soft answer turns away anger.
Soft answer. Yeah.
And what that does, it takes the emotion out of it.
Yeah.
Emotion is what gets us into these problems. When we stop thinking rationally and start thinking emotionally. Because when Jesus declared the temple, he was angry, but he was not emotionally angry. He was understandably angry. He had a reason for his anger. It wasn't just flying off the handle. And when we reasonably do things, it stops us from going further. And using a soft answer requires you to stop and think through what you're fixing to say rather than just firing your next thought off, which then fires up his next thought, my next thought, and we just end up yelling at each other.
Yeah. No, you're exactly right. And I remember some of my early work with children and professionally abused and neglected kids, and often had really challenging behaviors that you had to manage. And so there's all sorts of techniques out there, but one that I really liked was somebody developed this idea of the think it over spot. And maybe some of you guys have heard of it, but it was literally a spot that you could, like a piece of carpet or something you put down on the floor that was big enough for a person to stand in, usually brightly colored. And sometimes it would say think it over. And so if you had a child who was about to, in anger and in emotion, have a meltdown or a tantrum, then you would say, oh, time for the think it over spot. And that's what you're trying to do, is to get them to stop with the emotional flow just long enough to think about what they're about to do and what the ensuing consequences might be. So maybe we should be carrying something in our back pocket and throw the think it over spot down on the floor when we have an issue and stop. But that's what you're saying, is stop just long enough to consider what you're about to say, what the emotional content is of what you're about to say. And that's sort of what this guy suggests. He does it with the letter G, so it's kind of easy to understand and remember. First thing he says is glorify God. So no matter what we're about to do, we're about to say, or how we're about to respond, glorify God. He uses 1 Corinthians 10. So whatever, or so whether we eat or drink, do whatever you do, all to the glory of God. Boy, that's a whole nother lesson in itself right there. Whatever we do it to the glory of God. Whatever we do. So he says, all right, if you're going to deal with conflict and trying to restore relationships, you got to start with glorifying God. And the next one is get the log out of your own eye. I don't remember where it was. I've been here years ago. It was, or maybe it was a youth rally somewhere. And somebody was trying to make the point about the speck of dust and the beam. And they had, for illustrative purposes, a log that they'd gotten about this big around. It must have been 8 feet long. And this guy was trying to hold it, here. But, it got a lot of laughs and all. But man, it hit me. I was like, wow, speck of dust, a log. I mean, so he says, look, one of the other ways we manage this conflict is to get the log of our own eye. You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, then you'll see more clearly how to get that speck out of your brother's eye. Again, great memory verse, great, youth rally theme. It's stop and think about it as a means of managing our conflict with other people, fellow Christians, glorify God. Let me get this big old stick out of my eye first. But what struck me when this guy was holding it up there, basically kind of covered at least the whole half of his face. I mean, clearly he couldn't see anything out of this eye. And it really struck me. You're right. You can't see clearly when you got a log stuck in your eye. Great, great illustration. And then he says, go and be reconciled. And we've already looked at that. Leave your gift, go, first be reconciled to your brother, then come back. So glorify God, remove the log, get the log out, go, be reconciled. And the fourth one, gently restore. That's what Roger was speaking about. Soft, gentle communication. And I can attest to how powerful that can be. If you've raised any children, there are times when we want to speak very forcefully, very, don't miss what I'm saying kind of thing. But I can remember raising my two sons that a lot of times my gentle, whenever I would take a more gentle approach to communicating with them, it went so much further than the other. And I think that is such a powerful thing to gently restore. That's what you do when you love somebody. You don't pound them over the head and say, you got to straighten up. You gently restore. And again, that could be something that or should be something that in churches we talk about more and be more transparent about is how do we go about gently restoring? What does that look like? Well, here's what it looks like in Galatians. Brothers, if anyone is caught in any transgression, you who are spiritual should restore him in a spirit of gentleness. Keep watching yourself, lest you too be tempted. That's a great verse. Restore them in the spirit of gentleness. Why? Well, because that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm suggesting. That's the best way to go about it if you love someone. But you got to also look at yourself and be on guard. Be on guard, because we can then become angry, or we then can be. You put yourself in those shoes. Would you want somebody coming to you to try to help restore you out of a transgression, but they come at you with guns ablazing? I don't think most people respond well to that. So gentleness, spirit. So these are 4 things that you can think about as a way to glorify God, get the log out of your eye, go and be reconciled, and gently restore. And then Paul addressed some similar kinds of things and working through other problems. And we know in Philippians the story of the 2 sisters that were having, the 2 Christian sisters that were having issue with each other. And he kind of, in a sense, kind of gives us a bit of a formula, if you want to use that word, on how we can approach dealing with problems that we have against or with each other. And a lot of times it's tough because there may be some pain in that we don't want to deal with, or some pain or anger or emotion that we just don't want to deal with. And so avoiding it, or maybe becoming more angry about it, becomes what we do. And so sometimes it makes reconciliation tougher because of those emotions. But when we look at this, and we don't really have time to read it, but in Philippians 4, I think most of us know the story. But it's really fascinating how he's talking about these women who worked side by side, right, together for Christ, right, and other fellow workers. He even goes so far as to say, it talks about, these are the people whose names will be in the book of life, great people. And then he says, okay, because of this issue you're having, first thing he says for you to do is rejoice in the Lord. Now, see, that usually kind of messes with us. It's like, how do I rejoice when I'm not happy over here with somebody? I'm not happy with my fellow worker with Christ. How am I supposed to rejoice? I don't know. You just do. And I'm not trying to be simplistic here, but it's like, okay, I've got this disagreement. First thing I got to do is say, Lord, bless us in this experience, help us. What we are doing is for your honor and your glory, not mine. Maybe we have to even say those words, but that's what's suggested here. Rejoice in the Lord first, and then while you're at it, rejoice again. Be rejoiceful. And then he says, and then I was hoping I could say this when Roger was here, but they actually use the word, let your reasonableness be known to everyone. Reasonableness, there's a word. Being reasonable, right?
Another translation said forbearance.
Yeah, the word we don't use very often nowadays.
No,
What does it mean to forbear with somebody?
Forbearing is that you overlook somebody's anger even, and you bear with them. You are encouraging rather than trying to destroy.
Bearing with.
This is a gentleness.
Yes, very good. Bearing with, long suffering. Some of those older words that we may not hear as much nowadays are so powerful. Forbearance. Let your ability to forbear with someone be known to everybody. The Lord is at hand. And that's an interesting reminder. We can get all wrapped up in, are these the end of days? Well, I don't know. There's a lot of people out there who think we're in the end of days now, right? A lot of that's going on. I kind of take a simplistic view about that. Since the world began, we've been in the end of days. I mean, truthfully, because we know from Scripture that this will not exist forever. We already know that. So, I think we're gonna have to stop there, but the idea of let's do what we do because the Lord is at hand. So that's where we need to start. The Lord is at hand. Made in His image, and if the Lord is at hand, whenever that day comes, let's try not to be at odds with our brothers and sisters. Let's reconcile. Let's reconcile. And I think right now in our world, a lot of reconciliation needs to take place. That's clearly obvious. But in our churches, I think now we have a grand opportunity to practice reconciliation maybe like we never had before. So bless all of you guys. Hope you have a great week. And don't forget, you're made in His image. Made in His image. Thank you guys. We'll see you. See you next